they're not like me. They go to a different church. They like a different car.
They think a different way.
They think a different way. They're a vegetarian. They like dogs, not cats. And there's always that mistrust if you're just a little bit different. The more differences, the more the mistrust. That doesn't mean you hate them.
That's just human nature.
That's just human nature because you don't understand them. How could they possibly like a cat better than a dog? How could they possibly not like to eat a steak and be a vegan? How could they possibly be that way?
Well, this goes back a little bit to the class warfare thing, though, because I've worked at many places that I've worked at. I mentioned Sherwood Medical. There were 500 people in the building downtown, and I was basically I had a blue uniform and I ran the printing equipment. Okay. I mean, I wasn't a janitor, but I was a notch above that. But I would no more go up there and talk to the president of the company than, oh my God, I wouldn't do that. And then when I was working with River Hills Traveler, there were 4 of us, and I was in Emery's office at least 2 or 3 times, a day, saying, okay, we need to work with this. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
Because I was the associate editor and. But
how big was that company versus Sherwood Medical?
Well, it was just the people you could talk to, because the rest of the Sherwood locations, and they had 10 or 12 different locations around the world, but they were just sort of theoretic people out there. I mean, you knew the people, at least by face, that you worked with. But even with 500 people, I would never talk to the big boss. They'd probably fire me for even thinking I could breathe the same air.
Sure.
And this is one of the situations. James knows my husband is retired from Missouri State Parks, and there's no more bigger bureaucracy than the Missouri State government. And many of their problems are the same problems that you have in a large company, because even though one is government and one is, for profit, you've got the same sort of management issues. You got the same sort of, and you do get kind of a class warfare because there are very few people, I think I would now. I know 20 years ago, if somebody said, this is the governor, I'd turn around and run.
Yeah.
But, because you're brought up to not want to talk to the big dogs.
And today you're still that shy wallflower who doesn't like to call attention.
Well, I have to think twice before I do something. I'll put it that way. I'm not I wouldn't say I'm a shy wallflower, but it does take some gumption to say, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And once I made up my mind, forget it. Just get out of the road. We're doing this.
Sure.
But
there's a difference between being assertive and a loose cannon, though.
Right. And but I think that's part of this class warfare is that, first of all, you don't let the people talk to each other. Yeah. For social mores or whatever.
Because of that fear that they may find out that, they're kind of just like me.
Yeah. And, so that's, to me, that's sort of an issue, maybe an issue that should be dealt with in the schools, like you're as good as the next guy. And, my dad always did say, ask anybody anything, they might tell you say yes. And, if there was more of that, maybe we'd have more progress.
Well, the whole class warfare thing and pitting one side against another, I remember years ago when I worked in the machine shop, I was running a machine right on the aisle, and it was a boring job where it ran for a long time, and I did a lot of watching the machine run on this particular job. And there was a gentleman who emptied the chip barrels. So when we made chips are the filings that come off of a piece of metal when you machine it, okay? They go into the barrel, he hauls it away, spins the coolant out of it, and he sells the chips for scrap, okay? Well, he came by, and he was somewhat of a washwoman, okay? And occasionally, about once every year or two, when things were good with the company, the president of the company would issue a week's pay to everybody, okay? Everybody got a week's pay. And it had been a while. We knew things were good, so the rumor was, we might be getting a week's pay pretty soon. So the guy came by and said, hey, Charlie, did you hear about the week's pay that some of us are going to get? He said, no, what did you hear? He said, well, from what I understand, that people in the office are going to get a week's pay because they did a good job talking and convincing the customers to buy more product. The guys in the machine shop are going to get a week's pay because they were the ones who built that product that the customers wanted. But the maintenance guys, they really don't contribute like the rest, and they're not going to get a week's pay. Damn it, I knew it. They're screwing us again. And I watched him go up and down the aisle just spewing that
vitriol.
You know what he said? Mm-hmm. And finally, about an hour later, I said, Charlie, I'm pulling your leg. Yeah. He was mad because he thought it was just the whole class warfare thing. Now, I was just a stupid young man. I wasn't a kid then. But
bomb thrower.
I was a bomb thrower. I thought it was pretty funny. But that was just class warfare. He knew that he was going to get screwed. He never had before, but he just knew it was that far away, and he was getting screwed. Class warfare. It works that way because people are never content until they have more than the next guy. If I have $10 million and you've got 12 million, I'm not content. That's just the way human nature is. It's class warfare.
You know, on the eve of Veterans Day and of course the Marine Corps birthday, November 10th, I just thought of this is that a good example of a socialistic society that is a finely tuned machine is the American military. Spending my time in the Marine Corps, there's only 370,000 Marines, which isn't a lot. There's 4 Marine Air Wings and there's 4 Marine divisions. But everyone's the same. Everyone wears the same haircuts. Everyone wears the same uniforms. There's no colors in the Marine Corps. There's light green Marines and there's dark green Marines. Of course, there's ranks, so, the non-rates don't get the pay that the officers do. But like Joe had mentioned, if you wanted to talk to the company commander, your request masked, and you could. You could be a private, and you could walk into the CO's office, and you could talk to him, at least get his ear. So that's actually an example of a socialistic society, and it is. Being in the military, anyone that's been in, it has its own ebbs and flows of a society. Certainly on bases, things happen that don't happen outside the base.
Well, but again, it hasn't always been this way. But now you're not in the military unless you raise your hand and say I want in.
That's correct. It's an all volunteer.
Now you can't then later on say, you know what, I've changed my mind, I want out.
People do.
Well, but it's tougher to get out now than it used to be. You can, but you just can't. I'll be leaving tomorrow because the bed's hard and I don't like the food.
But that reinforces the theory that it works on a smaller scale and not so much on a larger scale. Everyone eats it, but you don't have to eat at the mess hall. But you can, and it's free. You just line up and get a plate of food.
Mm-hmm. I never thought of that, but you're right.
You get your uniforms, every year. You get boots, you get shoes, you get everything, really everything that you need right there on the base.
This guy doesn't get more shoes than that guy.
No.
You get, when
your uniforms become unserviceable, you take them to supply and they give you new ones.
What if you don't like green?
You're shit out of luck.
At least to the outside world, had an incident. It was down on a Saturday down at St. Robert, and went into
St. Robert, Missouri,
Missouri, which is right next to Fort Leonard Wood, which is a
Fort Lost in the Woods. We called it.
Yes, Fort Lost in the Woods, but Fort Leonard Wood. I actually did an article once. Who was Leonard Wood?
He was at Civil War. No. Spanish-American War, yeah.
And he was a doctor.
Yes, correct. He was one of Teddy Roosevelt's buddies.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
correct.
Having lived around here my whole life, it's like there has to be a person behind this. Where did this come
Fort
from?
Wood, sure.
Anyway, we were in Cracker Barrel having breakfast on Saturday morning.
Now, Joe, were you having the Uncle Herschel? That's my dad's favorite. on the menu.
No. But anyway, we ordered, and we saw people putting tables together. So there were about, I don't know, probably about 12 to 15 people off post, and they all walked in together. And in 12 or 15 people, there were men, women, at least 4 ethnicities, short, tall, no fat people, of course, but did not seem to be anybody, obviously in command. But they were having a great time.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's the common thread? They all got a weekend pass.
Yeah.
So they were all happy?
72-hour liberty.
So we don't care what you look like. Just you're one of us. We're going to go out. We're going to have a great time. And that's interesting because, at the same time, we're having all of these interracial, interethnic things going on in St. Louis. And, people are shooting each other because they can't get along with their 2-year-old who's the wrong color. But yet you've got young people who, they're just as happy to be in the Cracker Barrel instead of the mess hall.
Yeah.
And that is one thing I have noticed about the military. I've never been in, but I even a long time ago when my dad was in Korea, and he said, you just didn't ask. You just knew that was the guy next to you with the rifle, and you were going to save his butt, and he was going to save yours. Mm-hmm. And, that was kind of a revelation to me, because I'd never really seen that before.
Well, I never thought about the military that way. But again, it's a smaller group of people, and when you think Marine Corps, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mad Dog, but you may think of the folks in your division, battalion. What would be the term?
Company.
Okay, that's your brothers right there, because those are the guys that you deal with all the time.
It is. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you train with those guys. You go to the field with those guys. You your ceremonies with those guys. You eat with those guys. You drink with those guys. Yeah, it is, and it's an extended family. And Joe, you had mentioned that the different ethnicities that walked into Cracker Barrel, and we're having a good old time. When I first went in, I met guys that I'd never met before ever in my life. In the Marine Corps, guys that were from Guam, guys that were from the Philippines. I was a 18-year-old punk kid that never left St. Louis. And it gives you the opportunity to meet these other people, and then you realize, they're just like me. They just look different, and they're built different, and some of them have flat noses, and some of them have big ears, but they're the same.
Yeah, and I think that, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, but people are always comfortable with those who are most like them, and I think if we're making any progress in this country, maybe the world, but definitely the country, it's that the color of the skin doesn't matter as much as it used to. Am I off base there?
Nah.
I mean, we're still the way we, the way we are, the way we think, the things that we think are important.
All you have to do is turn on the idiot box and look at the commercials and look at the newscasters, and it's blended.
Which I think is a good thing, because we look past skin color.
Well, I can attest to this. Last time I was a poetry group in St. Louis that I was with when I was a very young person, and everybody there, I was the only person I think there under 55. They were all basically old white people writing poems about geraniums.
Okay.
And the same organization, which still exists today, I went to one of their workshops the middle of October. And instead of being in Kirkwood, it was down east of Grand Center, down on Washington Avenue. And it was like walking into the United Nations.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit surprised because there were some poetry groups that were always like that. But this particular one had never been that way before. And it was like, wow, this is cool. And, there was young black man who came. His mother brought him. He wasn't old enough to drive yet. Okay. And there was a lady who was from Syria and was, writing poems about what was happening to her hometown. And a Bosnian And, then there were some people just obviously from St. Louis area, but that would have